You're listening to episode 690 of the Father Bills Podcast. Welcome back. This week's episode is entitled Captured by Something New, given on the 5th Sunday in Lent, 2019. In our gospel today, which is rich in many ways in looking and pondering the meanings, there's some peculiar questions that we should be asking. First of all, how was it that this woman was caught in the very act of adultery? How'd that happen? Someone barged into somebody's house without knocking? I think knocking might have been a sign that might have stopped them. And where is this guy that she was with? Maybe he was fast and took off. Maybe actually he was a ruse for her. He was part of the plan. Remember, this whole thing was a setup. They were tricking Jesus, trying to test him. There's lots of questions we can ask. We don't have any definitive answers because it's silent. We don't know how it is that they caught her in adultery. We don't know where this man went. And then how is it that they brought her to Jesus? They would have been rendered ritually impure if they grabbed her and dragged her along. Maybe they got somebody else to do the dirty deed. So lots of questions. How is it she was finding herself in a place where she would do this? Jesus was going to the temple to pray. Shouldn't the Scribes and Pharisees be doing the same? Some scholars believe that the Romans had outlawed stoning. So part of this trap becomes even more interesting because if Jesus sides one way or another, he's going to be guilty either way. He's been put in traps like this before. So if he then agreed that she should be stoned, then he would be seen as an enemy of Rome. And if he didn't advocate stoning, then he would be breaking the law of Moses. So he doesn't even answer either of those questions because it is a trap. And he knows it's a trap. What was he writing on the ground? Was it a game of tic-tac-toe? Hangman? It's interesting, we have actually no writings of Jesus. All the scriptures, and none of it is a writing of Jesus. We hear him writing, but we don't know what he's writing. And when movies try to portray this, they would be probably best suited not to show much about what he's writing because no one knows. There's been some attempts as he was writing something from the prophets, kind of exposing the sin of these Pharisees and Scribes, but again, we don't know. But we know this, that the Scribes and Pharisees were using this woman, just like the other guy that was in adultery, huh? Pretending to be seekers of God's law, these Pharisees and Scribes, Jesus exposes them as hypocrites who are more interested in power and judgment than on God's mercy. Jesus on the writing on the ground does create one important act in this scene, which is he creates a delay. A delay which I'm so glad he does for a lot of us when we're in sin. If she was committing adultery, she was in sin. There's no way around that, and there was another party involved. But his delay allows the elders to then think about what they just did. And the people around to think about what they're doing. I think that's what's so wonderful about going to church, is it's an hour-ish, to think about what we're doing. To ponder on our own lives and ponder on the week. We start Mass with the Confiteor. Through my fault, what are my sins? I have sinned. We start it that way, and we should always start our day that way. Nobody is without sin. So he creates a delay, and it ultimately challenges everybody in his midst. I love it. Let the one amongst you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her. We really, myself included, we should all ponder on this and apply it in our lives. Where have we judged someone lately? Where have we not reflected on our own culpability in a situation? There's lots of situations where things go wrong and we may be really quick to point the finger at somebody else, but we don't do it for ourselves. Have we determined someone unworthy? They shouldn't be in the temple. They shouldn't be here. By the way, that's another thing. What's she doing in the temple? Why'd they drag her in there? Pharisees. Oops. Have you accused somebody as a sinner? Or either publicly or privately accused them? I found, and if you're a manager in any kind of work, I'm sure you've experienced this too, but I find it very profound that after I have to sometimes discipline an employee, which sometimes unfortunately is necessary, within 24 hours I've done something similar. Which makes it really, really hard. Which I think that's one of the gifts of getting older, is that we moderate because we know more. We've lived through a bunch of stuff. And we recognize that we have come up short ourselves. So where have we set up ourselves as judge and jury? Where have we assumed that we know what is right and what is wrong in someone's heart? See, it's important that we know what is a good thing to do and what are sins. There's no getting around that. Jesus makes it really clear. He says to her, go and sin no more. He didn't say, oh, by the way, you didn't sin. She did, in fact, do that. And he didn't let her off in the sense of saying, well, it wasn't sin. No. He challenges her. So putting that together, I go, okay, so we don't know anybody's heart. I mean, do you really know your own heart? I mean, I've surprised myself many a time. I go, why'd I do that? What was I thinking? And it causes me to think, people do things for reasons they may not even know themselves. And in fact, have you ever noticed this? Something happens and then someone blows up. It's a disproportionate response to the thing that's going on, right? That's a big sign. It's an iceberg going on. An iceberg, they're on the tip, you see the iceberg on the top, but there's way more underneath. There's way more underneath, and we'll never know what it is. All we do is we attack the tip of the iceberg, right? But the bottom part that's underwater, the persons may not even know. This is why we have people who are called counselors and psychologists, so that with the art of understanding human behavior, they can help people see their foibles or their sin or their struggles or the things that are hidden from them, why they do what they do. If we could do that ourselves, if we could know why we do what we do, we would be in a great position to try to fix things. But the fact remains, we're all shrouded from ourselves in some way. In some way, we are all incompetent to even judge ourselves. I've seen people on extremes where they condemn themselves as the worst of all sinners, and God can never forgive them. It looks like humility, but actually it's arrogance. It's like, who am I to say such a thing? Am I saying that God can't do something? And the other side is to just completely justify it and say, oh no, it's okay, it's healthy even. That's what our culture does. Somewhere in the middle is the truth. I've sinned, and God wants to lift me up. We hear in the scriptures that he is doing something new. What is that new thing? St. Paul speaks about. What is that? See, Paul speaks about the law, and he doesn't dismiss it. This is important. Sometimes I've heard some preachers dismiss the law. Jesus came to abolish the law. I'm like, actually, he said directly the opposite. I've not come to abolish the law. Jesus said this. I've never come to abolish the law. But St. Paul recognizes that he's been captured by Jesus. It's kind of a dramatic way of speaking about it. He's been captured by his love, and therefore he lives in that love. And so his life is now conformed to that love, which doesn't live by the law. It exceeds the law. Think about it. If you got married, you went to the city or county or whatever and got your marriage license, a contract from which you could negate or end that contract. We call that divorce, right? But the church says, no, this is a covenant. One says, what's the least I can do? That's the contract. We can make contracts for renting things and leasing things. I'm going to lease out this woman for a little while until it's not favorable, and then I will end the lease. But the covenant says something much more dramatic. What's the most I can do? And if I am working by that, which I fail at, but if we were working at that, we would not need to think about the law. It would be of no consequence, and that's what Paul's getting at. If I live by the Spirit of Christ, by the covenant, knowing that he will reconcile me to himself, and I just need to repent and live as he's called me to, then not only will I obey the law, I will exceed the law. I will live in the spirit of the law. So Jesus doesn't abdicate morality or the law, but he wants to capture our hearts. Imagine this woman who was caught in adultery. That's the other part of this we haven't talked about. Why would she be in that situation? I mean, we have no idea, but we can imagine some things. What would cause her to get into a place where she'd be doing that? And now imagine she's been outed in a public way. Imagine the humiliation. But it gets worse. It gets even darker because really they're not after her, right? They're after Jesus. And she's a pawn. In fact, she's property by which they're going to then demonstrate that Jesus is wrong. And I mean this very seriously. She would be considered property. Women are of the level of property in this day. And Jesus stands in the way. No one's done more for women's rights than Jesus Christ. And he stood in the way of these Pharisees and sat in these scribes to stand before them, giving her dignity, recognizing that she is a person, not a thing. And she will not be used for someone else's ploy. Imagine someone standing up for you like that. Imagine you've done wrong, and then there's someone that steps in your way to advocate for your cause. If you're in a court of law, that person is your best friend. And Jesus is coming against the greatest leaders of his culture, in the Jewish culture. He doesn't even speak to the Romans at this point. He bypasses them. Remember, he bypasses the whole trap by not responding as they were expecting and throwing it right back at them. Who here is without sin? Feel free to cast the first stone. So let's remember that Jesus is doing something new. This woman then is not just property. This woman is a daughter of God. And Jesus lifts her up in dignity with a challenge. He loves her. He put his own life on the line there for her. She should be stoned. The other guy should have been stoned. Nobody gets stoned. Jesus should have been stoned for advocating for her. Isn't it amazing that the grace of God walks into a situation which is deadly, and he walks out of it with life and everybody around him? Can you imagine some of the Pharisees who actually have a conscience thinking about that event, going home like, boy, did we mess up. Man, I was wrong. We know of one sympathetic Pharisee, Nicodemus. I don't know if he was there or not. But have you ever been challenged in this way? Where we made a decision and then someone corrects us? See, they were corrected, though, publicly. Hopefully, our corrections are done quietly, one-on-one, with charity. See, when we are then absolved, when we go to confession, the absolution didn't say, oh, you didn't sin. No, there's a recognition of sin. That's the whole reason we're there. But then Jesus forgives us. We had our communal reconciliation service last week, and it was amazing. I don't know, we had easily 200 people there. Might have been 250. And 8 priests. I thought, oh goodness, we need like a miracle of the loaves and fishes here. How are we going to do this? So 2 hours later, we were done, though. That is, the service ended and everybody had left. What happened there? Sheer miracle after miracle after miracle after miracle. I know for myself, sometimes on Saturdays, as we all do, and I've made this comment before in other homilies, you know, we all have moods. I can be in a bad mood. But every time I walk into the confessional, even if I have a bad mood, I always walk out experiencing, I'll call it the afterglow of the grace that God has bestowed on the penitents. And I can't help but be changed. What a great thing it is. And how different I know that I look on everything when I have experienced this joy. And how small my whatever concerns are after I've experienced the reconciliation of others. And how I'm challenged to ask myself, would I be willing to say what they just said? Because I'm guilty of it too. So let Christ do something new. We're not at the end of Lent here, but we're towards the end. We're on the downhill side, and we have just a couple weeks left. Maybe you have a Lenten decision that you made and haven't completed it. Maybe you haven't spent the time in prayer that you said you would. Whatever it might be, today's a new day. Consider starting today. Lent starting today on the 5th week of Lent. It's not so much how much time we spend doing something, it's the intensity in which we do it. It's kind of like that saying we've heard, it's not how long you've lived, but it's how you lived in the life that you've been given. See, when we're conformed to Christ, who's making all things new, making us new, then we become like Christ to the world. Now, oh boy, does our world need that. We need Christ to be more and more in our communities, in our culture, in our legislation, in our government. We need to let Christ's hands and feet be our hands and feet so that we can go out and be reconcilers, so we can make stony hearts soft, so that he may make new souls or renew souls, so that people may not just live by whatever they feel like. And not even simply just by the law, but that they would exceed the law, that they would be captured, if you will, by Christ's love, being possessed by God's grace, and then active in works of charity and mercy. I encourage us to reread this text, go home and reread it, and start asking questions. Put yourself in the place of each of these people, the Pharisees, the Scribes, the woman, the apostles hanging around, the bystanders that have no idea what's going on and then witness something new. Maybe something new will happen for you too.
Thanks again for listening to this episode of the Father Bill's podcast. You know, another question I had as I was pondering on this afterwards is, what about the family of this woman that was caught in the very act of adultery? I wonder how they had felt. I wonder what their thoughts were that their daughter would go to that extent, or that she would be used in such a way, or that she would be near death because of stoning, or that she met Jesus who would save her. I wonder. Lots of people have members of their family who are a black sheep, or who have gone astray, or who have made great mistakes. And are we the people that will be with them and help them to be pulled out of that darkness? I hope so that we can help them on their way in their faith. Those are just some questions and thoughts as I was pondering and concluding this homily. Now, if you have any questions or comments, you can go to my website, fatherbill.org, FRBILL.org, and there you can email me. You can see what's going on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, and I will certainly try to get back to you as soon as I can if you have any questions. And until next time, may God bless you and have a great week. Bye-bye.